So let's take a look at this article here. Again, this is from 2013. This picture is a photo of the singer Chiaguinho. He was part of a popular samba group in the 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. Then he went solo. Today, this guy Chiaguinho, he recently became the first Black Brazilian billionaire. But when you see his choice of partners, it's almost the rule. You see a well-to-do Black man, I would say it's almost automatic that he's married to a white woman. There's just no way around it. And when I started looking into this, with the spread of the internet, you had access to see, well, who are these people dating? And just time after time after time, it was hard to find a well-to-do, a Black male who earned a good salary, who was married to a clearly Black woman. It was just at least at most they'll be married to a light-skinned woman who's passing for white, but usually they're almost always white, right? And so this is a question that I was just curious about this, like, well, what's going on here? I'm questioning, like, how does this rise in Black consciousness rise? How is it intertwined? And how do we get to the point where you're discovering this Blackness and at the same time you're still finding this, if I'm a Black man, I have to have this white woman? So after a while, it wasn't just me. Matter of fact, a lot of Black Brazilian women bloggers by 2012 and 13, they were openly questioning this. I was led to believe this wasn't a problem until I started seeing more and more Black women bloggers writing about this question of why are all of our Black men marrying white women? So articles like this, problematize the issue a little bit more. They're willing more to ask this question that was kind of like, it was almost like taboo to question interracial marriage, but this is exactly what happened around 2012 and 13. So this article, besides the part that I wrote, I'm gonna get into the section that I translated from an article that was actually written by a white Brazilian, because he was looking into this question. And this is why he titled, this is one of the article. This is a translation of the article that I translated. It was how interracial marriages are one of the most glaring symptoms of Brazilian racism. So let's get into this. Historically, Brazil has always promoted itself as a racial democracy where races mix in harmony without the racial conflict of other multiracial societies. While it is clear that racism is a strong element in Brazilian society, whether of the blatant or subtle variety, dissecting the relatively high rate of interracial marriage is often used as quote unquote proof that racism is not a problem in Brazil. In reality, the analysis below points out factors that actually show that racism and assumed racial superiority are also a factor in the marriage arena. According to numbers from 2010, around 75% of people who define themselves as white are in long-term relationships with other white people. In the case of Black men, or what we'll say homens pretos, darker-skinned Black men, 26.4% are married to white women, 39.9% are married to Black women, or mulheres pretas, and 32% are married to brown women, meaning, or pardas, as we say. Pardas, again, meaning brown or mixed race. In regards to Black women, again, mulheres pretas, women who are more obviously Black, 25.5% marry white men, or brancos, while 22.9% marry brown men, or pardos, and a little more than 50% marry Black men, meaning, again, homens pretos. Among persons defining themselves as pardo, again, brown men and women, around 69% marry other pardos. These numbers can be analyzed in a number of ways. First, the percentage of interracial marriages continues to rise in the country as a whole, with about 31% of all marriages being of the mixed variety. Other interesting facts are that Black women are more likely to marry white men than brown men, and that the rate of marriage with whites is 10% higher for Black men than for Black women. Social status, social mobility, and marriage has been studied within the larger study of racism in Brazil for the past 50 years, and even outside of academic circles. Everyday Brazilians have pointed out a racial hierarchy in terms of interracial relationships and marriages. The racial hierarchy often places Black women, again, darker skinned Black women, at the bottom of the marriage ladder, as women in this group spend more time of their lives single and are on average older at the time of marriage than members of other demographic groups. It is also a well-known fact that over the past century, there has been an ideology within many Black families that encourage their offspring to whiten or improve the family by successive marriages with lighter or whiter skinned people. One thing I need to point out here, as I mentioned earlier, in general, the Black and brown population is pretty much in the same boat in terms of social economic structure, years of education. Almost every social economic factor that has been studied over the years, you constantly see Black and brown people in the same boat. But one difference is in the arena of marriage, where women who are considered brown or pardas have a clear advantage over darker skinned Black women who have, more difficulty finding partners to get married to. So this is one area where you see a clear evidence of this racial hierarchy. The closer you are to white thing, you having more success in life if you have lighter skin. Now, in most categories, the Black and brown, the comparison between Black and brown is almost just completely even. In some cases, the Parda category having certain advantages over the Preta, maybe by 1, 2, or 3%, 1 to 3 percentage points. And sometimes you'll see the Preta population actually having advantages over the Parda category. But generally across the board, they're always at an inferior position in comparison to the white population. But one area where we see a clear difference is the difficulty in getting long-term relationships and how harder it is for darker skinned Black women. This ideal of embranquecimento, meaning whitening, was actually an acknowledged ideology of white elites in the late 19th century in order to get rid of the nation of Afro-Brazilians in pursuit of a white population.
But I have an example in my own family. For example, my grandmother was Black. She used it to tell her daughters, my mom and my aunties, to marry only white men. Why? To purify our blood from the African ancestry. So, one day I asked other Black people in Brazil if they had been told the same story on their families, and they confirmed. Also, in other Black families in Brazil, there was this mentality of purifying the blood by interracial marriage.
These facts, with these facts in mind, one could argue that there is much more going on besides just love when the topic is interracial marriage and relationships. Now, with that said, I want to take a look at a famous photo, a famous painting. And this is a painting that you've seen a lot of people talk about online. I've seen several YouTube videos where when people get into discussions of race, the myth goes that Ham is supposed to be the birth of the Black race. Ham is supposed to be the father of the Black race. And because Ham was supposed to have been cursed, he was said to have dark skin because he was cursed, right? So this painting is actually called The Redemption of Ham, or Ham's Redemption. In Portuguese, it's Redenção de Cã is called. So what's going on in this picture? Let's take a look here. At the far left of the picture, this is a painting from 1895 that was, it's in a museum in Rio de Janeiro, and it represents the racial ideal, the racial dream of white elites to whiten the Black family. So at the far left of the photo of the painting, you have a dark-skinned grandmother. In the middle, you see her daughter, who is what they call mulata or mixed race. She is several shades lighter than her mother. because the grandmother had a relationship with a white man. Um, Next to the mulatta mixed daughter is the Portuguese immigrant, another white man. And that relationship leads to the baby in the arms of the mixed race woman, a phenotypically white baby. So what's going on in here? What is this image saying? If you look at the black mother, the black grandmother here, you see that her hands are outstretched. She's looking to the sky. Behind her are some palm leaves. Palm leaves represent hope. So what the grandmother is saying to the sky, she's looking and thanking the heavens, like, thank God for removing this black stain from my family. That's how most people interpret this photo. Now, it's intriguing. It's not an easy conversation to have when you meet a lot of black people in Brazil, particularly those who are married across racial lines. One particular family that I knew, there were 4 children in the family. And I'm saying at the time that I met these people, they were in their 30s and 40s. 3 boys and a girl. The 3 boys were, like a brown skin, clearly black people. The sister, the youngest of the siblings, she was darker skinned than the brown skinned siblings. She looked a little bit like Patti LaBelle to me. Um, the I think the third oldest sibling, a male, was married to a light skinned black woman. They produced 2 black children. But in the case of the oldest sibling, who was clearly a brown skinned man, he married a woman who, if I'm not mistaken, she was of German descent. And they had 2 boys. The younger boy, they're both teenagers. I think one of them might be in his 20s now. The younger boy looks, even though he's light skinned, he looks more black. Whereas the older one, he's just really kind of racially undefinable. He has very fair skin. He has loosely curled hair. In his face, he looks more like his white grandmother than he does like to his father. Um, so I was cool enough with this guy that I would have this conversation with him. And I showed him this painting one day, and I asked him if he knew what it meant. So I explained it to him the same way I just explained it a few minutes ago. And he didn't believe it at first. And after I explained, I'm like, look at the black grandmother. She's happy to see that she has a white grandbaby. This is what's going on in Brazil. And when he thought about it, I just remember he sunk his head down in his hands, and he was just silent for like 10 seconds as this truth started to set in. He had already participated in this, and people that I knew in his family had told me, like, I have never known him to date a black woman. He had a good job, he had a good career. What it was almost the rule. There was actually a book called Vira Regra, which means this has become the rule. Successful black man, he's going to have a white wife. In fact, there's another article I have on this blog where a man did a study on black executives in Brazil. Now, black executives of top companies is already rare in Brazil, but when you do find them, he found this was not the purpose of his study. It was just something that he found. He was just studying their experiences in an almost completely white world. And he found that of the 50 men that he interviewed, like, it was either 49 or all 50 of these men were married to white women. So this is just the point that I'm making in this video. When I mentioned this to the sister in the family, the one who I said looks a little bit like Patti LaBelle, I showed her this image. She had a child with a guy who was not necessarily, he would never be considered white in the United States. He looked a little bit like that actor, if you remember this TV show called Saved by the Bell. The guy who played, I think the character's name was Slater. In the United States, people would think he was Hispanic because that's how he looked. He wasn't white. But in Brazil, some people considered him white, even with his clearly indigenous features. The woman had a clearly black son too. He was a few shades lighter than her, but he was still clearly black. And when I showed her this image, she says, "Well, Marcus, that's your opinion. That's not necessarily what this photo means." I'm like, "But this is clearly what it means." Everybody. So social scientists have studied this painting on for years. It was actually, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been subsidized. It might have been something that the Brazilian government asked this artist to create this image because this is what they wanted to present as the future of Brazil. She didn't believe it. But more and more people have discussed this image has been the topic of many blog posts, YouTube videos. So everybody knows about this image by now. It's really something you can't really deny. So anyway, I want to get on with this article. Below is how one blogger saw it. This is an article entitled "Racism, Miscegenation, and Interracial Marriages in Brazil," and it's by a writer named Alex Castro. And now, from what I saw, Alex Castro, he may not pass for white in the United States, but in Brazil, he looks like he would be considered white. So this is his view on what he sees in terms of interracial marriage and this idea of whitening in Brazil, and what the choice of lighter partner says about race in Brazil. So this is what he says. When I write about racism in Brazil, many readers who are in deep denial argue that we are not racist, citing as evidence our miscegenation, our interracial marriages. A typical email that I get. Here in the United States, if you are Black, you can be famous, rich, which was. When you marry a blonde with blue eyes from Kennebunkport, Maine, nobody will think it's beautiful. In Brazil, if you are Black and poor and exactly like Ronaldo Phenomenal, or rather, Ronaldo the Phenomenon, the retired superstar, many of you who are into soccer will remember Ronaldo. He's considered one of the greatest soccer players of all time. If you're Ronaldo the Phenomenon, you are okay. When you become famous and rich, just like Ronaldo, you are okay. If you marry a blonde, her family thinks it's beautiful. If anyone says that's a lie, I'm all ears for an explanation. As it is, Brazil is a classist country above all. Now, racism and prejudice exist in the world. It always has existed. It always will exist. There is no place that is 100% racism prejudice free. But using this as an argument is not seeing the main problem. In the country where Pelé, the famous, superstar soccer player, dated Xuxa, quote, the whitest woman in Brazil, and according to singer-songwriter Chico Buarque, the only white woman in Brazil, and everyone thought it was beautiful. They say, if Pelé was poor, what would you think? Yeah. So what's going on here? Pelé obviously is probably considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest soccer player of all time. He was, but for many people, Pelé is the first Brazilian that they ever come in contact with, through sports. I remember learning about Pelé in about, I don't know, I was about 8 years old. There was a time when Pelé played in the United States in the North American Soccer League. So everybody knew Pelé. I don't know if it was sometime in the 80s, maybe, that he started dating this white woman named Xuxa. It's her stage name. Xuxa would go on to become one of the richest women in Brazil. Now, as I said before, the three states in southern Brazil, Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul, is considered the white European section of Brazil because 80% of the people in those three states identify themselves as white. You had massive European immigration to those states, starting in the late 1800s or so. So even you can go there now and you'll find people there who, no questions asked, would be considered white anywhere in the world. So Pele was dating this white woman for, I don't know how long the relationship lasted. In reality, I don't even really believe that it was real. I think it was just a way of making this woman famous. They broke up shortly after. And Xuxa would go on to become this enormous television star. She had a number of shows, the Xuxa Show da Xuxa, where her show was targeted at little kids. She had, she made albums with little kids, theme songs. Kids across Brazil love Xuxa, even though she had this group of dancers. They were all very white and very blonde. They were like little Xuxas. And a lot of people ask, well, how come she never has any Black girls on her show? Xuxa has an enormous influence in Brazil, right? And, what this guy said, Chico Buarque is one of Brazil's most famous singer-songwriters, and he says, Xuxa is the whitest woman in Brazil. But again, if you go to the South, you see a lot of women that look like Xuxa. A lot of the top TV show hosts in Brazil on television are women who are mostly blonde. So this idea that there can't be any white people in Brazil because it's a mixed race nation, that's a fallacy. I mean, look at Gisele Bündchen. Tom. A lot of people knew her as the top model in the world for a while. She's married to who they call the GOAT, the greatest quarterback in the NFL history. She's married to Tom Brady. So you look at Shusha, you look at Gisele, is like, okay, these are two clearly white women. So this for a lot of people, Pele was the black superstar who opened the floodgates for black men to start dating white women. A lot of people, when they started wondering why all of these black athletes and entertainers were marrying white women, they point to Pele, like Pele started this, right? So basically, what they're saying here, you find that in some terms, you'll get a lot of white families who would reject having their daughter marry especially a dark-skinned black man, as the case with Pele. But if he's got money, it's like they'll just kind of turn their head and like, okay. It's almost, you almost feel like it's a thing where people just kind of think in the back of their minds, well, they're going to marry white. The children are going to marry white. So eventually the family will remain as whiteness, maintain its whiteness. Now, people might disagree with that, but this is the way that I see it. I'm like, I think people know that, within a few generations, just like the painting that I just showed you, within a few generations, the kids and the offsprings of this mixed race couple will eventually whiten themselves. I mean, anybody who sees it differently, show me the proof. This is what I've seen time and time again.